How can you revise your outline? In this lesson, you will learn how to revise your outline by analyzing your first draft outline and your evidence. The prompt we're working with is, after reading Up from Slavery, Chapter 1, write a multiple paragraph essay that asserts how Washington's use of rhetoric shows his perception and positioning of audience. Support your position with evidence while considering a counterclaim. We're remembering that the writing process begins with reading closely and analyzing the text, moves on then to generating and planning, then to drafting and revising, and finally to editing and publishing. We're right now on the generating and planning stage. We'll also remember that argumentative writing is when you collect and you evaluate evidence and then argue a claim. You need to organize your evidence and the transitions that go between the evidence and the claim in a really careful and thoughtful way. Another way to think about doing those two big ideas is with this structure. So it would begin with an introduction. In your introduction, you'd have your hook, your title, the author, a brief summary of the text, and a thesis statement. You'd have body paragraphs that you'd repeat as necessary, maybe as few as one, maybe as many as 3 or 4, depending on the circumstances. And then your evidence inside of the body paragraphs, neatly connected with your transitions between the evidence and the claim. And that, again, can be repeated as necessary. So one body paragraph might have just one piece of evidence with its transitions, or it might have multiple pieces of evidence. And then finally, a conclusion, when you restart your thesis and then you state a universal statement, which is when you bring your audience to some grander truth. So step 1, review the outline with special attention to your evidence. Step 2, consider the relationship between evidence and thesis statement. Ask yourself, how else could I organize this information? Step 3, rewrite outline so that ideas follow more logically. So step 1, I'm looking back over my outline with special attention to my evidence. And I'm going to begin as I always begin, by looking over my thesis statement to make sure that's clear. And in my thesis statement, I'm saying that Washington's use of rhetoric shows that he sees his audience as divided racially and that he positions them together against slavery. So then my first piece of evidence is supporting an idea about how he perceives his audience. And as I look at that, I think it works, but something doesn't quite fit for me, and so I'm just noticing that in my mind and hanging on to that thought. And then in body paragraph 2, which is going to be about his positioning of the audience, I've got some evidence there about the shift from using I to we. Now, as I was looking over that and I was slightly uncomfortable, it made me think about these quotations back in the text. I remembered from page 2 here when Washington is writing first about his father and then about his mother. And with his father, he says that, he doesn't find a special fault with him, that he was just an unfortunate victim of the institution, and that she was simply a victim of the system of slavery. So who knows how this will fit in, but they're singing out to me as important, so I'm just going to jot them down. A special fault, unfortunate victim. These pieces of evidence maybe will be useful if I restructure how my essay is fitting together. So step 2 is to consider the relationship between the evidence and the thesis statement, and then ask yourself, how else could I organize this information? So here again is my outline, and like I said, there's some pieces there that just don't seem quite right, and so I'm thinking, how else could I organize this information? Now, as I look at that first body paragraph, the one that just didn't quite sit right with me, I'm thinking about how that quotation is really more about his perception of the black audience versus his white audience. So now I'm thinking to myself, what if that very first body paragraph shifted? Maybe I should have 3 body paragraphs total, and I could have one about his perception of one racial audience and one about the other race of audience, and then a third body paragraph about about the positioning of his audience. So now I rewrite my outline so that the ideas follow more logically. So here's the original one more time, and then you'll see how I shift it. Now we have 3 body paragraphs, and you can see in red that I've even filled out my outline a little bit more. And this is an important thing to remember when you're doing really any step along the writing process. It should be creative, just like any piece of artwork, that as you go, you're continually adjusting and crafting. So just in that way, with body paragraph 1 here, I knew that I was going to make it be just about his black audience, but it came to me more specifically how he's perceiving them. He's perceiving them as needing reassurance about their dignity and power. So I just jotted that in. And then similarly with his perception of his white audience, as needing soothing about the anger of the black people. So it's very important that you recognize that writing is a recursive activity, that you're continually coming back over and recrafting and shifting and stretching. It's not something that comes out perfectly the first time. But now, as you can see, I have a much more logically organized outline for my essay. So in the writing process, as you can see, we've worked from reading closely and analyzing. Right now we're at the generating and planning stages. We're just about ready to start drafting and revising, and then we'll be to editing and publishing. So in this lesson, we began by reviewing the outline with special attention to our evidence. We considered the relationship between the evidence and the thesis statement, and we asked ourselves, how else could I organize this information? And then step 3, I rewrote the outline so that the ideas followed more logically. In this lesson, you have learned how to revise an outline by analyzing your first draft outline and your evidence.